Good afternoon, everyone. It looks like we have a nice crowd from all over North America today, and my name is Rich Longo, and I'll be your host. Thank you for joining us for another Flycast Partners webinar. Today's webinar is Understanding the ITIL Service Lifecycle, a practical guide to using the lifecycle approach. And our presenter will be none other than our own Chuck Spencer. Chuck is our enterprise service management practitioner and has a very accomplished background that includes Lean Six Sigma Black Belt and ITIL V3 expert with multiple certifications, including ISO 20000 Manager and Consultant, COVID 5, PMP, Agile and Scrum, Master and Change Management practitioner. And Chuck has well over 25, pretty close to 30 years of experience in improving and implementing the service management processes to drive quality, efficiency, and customer satisfaction. He has an innovative and results-oriented senior technology leader with progressive experience in all phases of service management, project and process management, enterprise technical support, and organizational leadership and strategic development. Chuck, before we get started, I'm going to talk about Flycast Partners a little bit. Flycast is here to deliver a seriously amazing IT experience. Just ask our customers. We have over 1,000 of them now. Founded and staffed by personnel that have many years of experience in the IT space, we took the best ideas from these collective experiences and added the best components necessary to grow and become a leading value-added reseller in the North American IT market. We offer the best-in-class implementation and services and training in ITSM, ITAM, workload automation, batch processing, artificial business intelligence, capacity optimization, cost control, enterprise service management, all using ITIL best practice. Our professional services team can easily scale up or down to meet the IT needs of any customer, regardless of your size, complexity, or budgetary restrictions. I encourage you to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. Take a look at what we offer on our website, the various offerings that we have, everything from training to the various technologies, upcoming webinars and partner events that we have going on, as well as some training courses that you may very well be interested in or your coworkers may very well be interested in. So with that being said, I think you've heard enough from me. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our man of the hour, Mr. Chuck Spencer.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Give me just a second here to get everything switched over. And there we are. You should be able to see my screen there now. As Rich said,
great.
Today's topic is understanding the ITIL service lifecycle. And what I'm really going to try to do here is give you a practical guide to using this ITIL service lifecycle approach. For the last 6 weeks or so, we've been talking about the lifecycle, and if you've been attending those sessions, heard some of the different phases and stages and the processes that are in all of those. And by now, you've figured out that this is a pretty massive undertaking to really take this on. So today, we're going to talk to what's just really a practical guide, a practical approach to putting all of this in place and getting all of this really ready to go. And if you missed any of those presentations, of course, we have those available on YouTube, so you can get a hold of us, and we'll make sure you get a recorded copy of those that you can go back and revisit or share with others in your company. So today, you know, I'm guessing that a lot of you are here because you have questions like the ones that are shown here. You're trying to understand exactly what is this thing called the ITIL service lifecycle and how it can really help your organization better manage your services and really be more successful. And you know, also trying to understand how do you ever implement all of this. It's a big undertaking. And so we're going to talk about what's the best way to really do that. And then you also want to figure, you may be attending this because you're trying to figure out just where can I go to learn more and where can I turn to get some help so that I can not just inform my boss and sound like I know what I'm talking about, but so I can help the whole organization and help them to improve and make sure that we all know where to get this information that we need. And so hopefully by the end of the session today, you'll have found an answer to most of these questions. Now, I'm not really sure I can help you with the last one that's here, but perhaps just understanding the challenges you have before you and some way to respond and address those might add some more meaning to life and help you out a little bit with that last question. Who knows? So let's start, though, by answering the first question. What exactly is the service management ITIL service management lifecycle? And the ITIL service management lifecycle is an approach to service management. It's not the only approach. It was never meant to be. But it does offer best practices in the form of concepts, of processes, and tools that can be adopted and adapted to help you improve your organization's service management capabilities. And that's what it's really all about, improving your service management capabilities. And that includes improving the way that you use the processes, the skills and experience and training of your people, the way you use technology, the way you use management architectures, the way you use all of these things to really deliver and support your services. Now, the ITIL lifecycle, does consist of 5 stages, and we've been talking about these over the last month. But these are service strategy, service design, service transition, service operations, and continual service improvement. And each stage really emphasizes the importance of coordination and control of the functions. And keep in mind that when we talk about functions, we're talking about the teams, the groups that are within your organization. So it's emphasizing the importance and coordination of the functions and the processes and the systems and the management architectures, and again, everything you need to manage the full life cycle of IT services. Now, each stage, of course, as we've said before, is actually a book within ITIL that provides just a ton of information on best practices within that area. And the information that's contained in these books really provides a structure of how the processes, the people, the technology, and your partners, because that's very important, the partners that you have, can be connected to help you effectively and efficiently deliver services. And I stress the word can here because ITIL is not a standard. It simply tells you what can be done based on what others have done successfully. And I also want to stress that while the best practices and concepts in these books focus on IT, they were actually drawn from a broader perspective of service management and can be and have been used to manage services other than IT. So each stage of the life cycle serves a specific purpose. And service strategy is the stage where we define the strategy that we as a service provider need to use to enable the business to achieve the business outcomes that are part of their strategy. And that includes determining at a high level what types of services we need to provide, who the customers and users of those services are going to be, what capabilities do we need to develop within the organization to provide those services, and of course, how are we going to fund all of this? And then in service design, we begin to realize that strategy by designing not just the services, but also the processes and the functions that are needed to realize that strategy. And then service transition is where we build and we test the services. And again, not just the services, but the processes and the tools and the management architectures, everything we need to deliver, manage, and support our services and move those services into production. And then service operation, well, that's where we work to efficiently and effectively deliver and maintain support for all of the services that we have moved into that production environment. And then finally, continual service improvement is the stage where we monitor and we measure our performance in delivering those services and make sure that the services continually align to the business needs. So in all, there are 26 processes within the ITIL service lifecycle. And I'll give you a minute to soak that in. Wow, 26 processes. That's a lot. How does any organization implement all that? Not to mention the 4 functions that we talked about. How do you get all of that in place? That's a lot for any organization to take on. And for each one of these processes, there are policies, there are goals and objectives, roles and responsibilities, metrics, procedures, workflow that all have to be defined. And of course, all of this has to be documented and the organization then trained on it and governance established. And not to mention that we have to select tools and technology to help manage all of this. And that, of course, all brings us back to one of our original questions of how do we implement this beast? Well, let me tell you a secret. You don't implement ITIL. And you're probably surprised to hear me say that. But hopefully you're going to find out why as we talk about this. You don't implement ITIL. As defined in Merriam-Webster or in any dictionary, to implement is to carry out or to accomplish something, to give practical effect to and ensure actual fulfillment of concrete measures. Well, implementing 26 processes is probably more than anybody with a sane mind wants to take on. And it's not really a practical approach for most organizations. And given that it's a framework of best practices and not a standard, how do you even ensure actual fulfillment by concrete measures? So what do you do if you don't, start a project to do all 26 processes? What is it that you really should do with this framework? Well, if you take nothing else away from this presentation today but this concept, then I've done my job. I mean, again, let's face it, if you were starting from a clean sheet of paper, had no services, no organization in place, no processes, then you could create a project and start by developing your strategy, then designing your services and your support organizations and your processes, and then build and test these and start delivering and supporting those services. But I'm willing to bet that no one on this call is in that position. And while it may look like it's a serial exercise and you work your way from strategy to design to transition to operations and then start to continually improve, that's not the intent at all. And in fact, if you look at the ITIL books, you'll find this phrase, adopt and adapt, throughout the library. And it's a core concept of the ITIL service lifecycle approach. So let's use a simple analogy to take this just a bit further. Think of building or buying your home. Some of you may have been in a position where you had the ability to make a clean start. You selected a plot of land, you worked with an architect or designer to come up with a plan for your home that had everything in it you ever wanted, and you started to build it from the ground up. That's a great way to start if that's where you are. And you can define your strategy, gather your requirements, design everything, again, from a clean sheet of paper. Take your time inspecting and testing, and then when everything is ready to go live, you move in. But again, I'm betting that very few of you on this call are in that position. You've taken a role or you've been placed in a role where there are already services in place. You've got an organization that needs to be managed. You've got customers that need to be answered to and fires that have to be put out. So your world looks a little bit more like this. You got a fixer-upper. So do the same things you would do if you were buying a fixer-upper. You start by doing an assessment or an evaluation to determine the condition of the home that you've inherited or that you've bought. And then you begin to upgrade and repair it as needed to make that home meet your needs. And you start by fixing the bare necessities. Get a roof over your head to protect you from the rain and the storms that happen every day. And then you think about what you want your home to look like in 6 months or a year or 5 years from now. And you look at your finances. How much can you afford to do now? And how much can you put off? And of course, the question is, where, again, does the ITIL service lifecycle fit into this, and how does it really help you? Well, to answer that question, let's take apart the service lifecycle. And instead of talking about the specific processes in each stage, let's talk about what happens in each stage. What are the activities? What is it we're really trying to accomplish? Service strategy, we've got 5 processes here. And for some of you, these processes, you already know what they mean and you already know what they're about. But for a lot of you, you're looking at these processes going, I'm not even really sure what that means. How do I know? Do I need to do that process, or how that's going to help me, or what that's really going to do? So again, let's look at what the activities that are within service strategy. As I mentioned earlier, this is where we're going to determine who are our customers, who are our users, and then what services do those customers and users need to achieve the business outcomes that they're really trying to accomplish. And then for those services, if we're going to provide those, what capabilities do we need to build as an organization? And does it make sense for us to build those, or should we subcontract and get third-party vendors to provide some of these? And which ones should we do? Which ones should we rely on vendors to do? And then, when we're looking at these capabilities, of course, we're looking at things, again, like processes. What processes are we going to need? What kind of tools and technology will we need? As well as just what kind of skills and experience will the people that we have working for us really need. And then we just figure out, how we're going to fund all of this so that we can deliver it. Is it going to be an allocation to the business? Are we going to do chargebacks? Just get a strategy for how all this is going to, where are we going to come up with the money for all of this? And then, and also important is looking at how value is really going to be determined, and keeping in mind that value is always in the eyes of the customer or the user. How are they going to see value in what we're providing to them? IT isn't really there to provide value. IT is there to allow the business to create value. And we'll talk more about that in a little while perhaps, but that's really what it's all about. So I want to be looking at, how will the services that I provide allow the business to generate the value they need to generate to move the business forward? And then how are we going to manage that relationship with the business? How will we know what their strategy is? How do we keep in touch with their tactical plans, their strategic plans, their operational plans? Who's going to do that within our organization? How are they going to do that? And then what are the overall policies and objectives for IT service management? These are all things that happen in service strategy. And then in service design, we've got a number of processes here. And some of you may be looking at these going, well, that doesn't even make sense for these to be in design. Things like availability and capacity and continuity and security management. And supplier management, why are those even here? Well, the idea is that you've got to design these into your services. So these are things that have to be done, because what you're doing here is you're trying to realize that strategy. And as part of the life cycle, you're trying to capture and document what are the requirements that the users are giving us, that they have for these particular services. And you're trying to define and document the services themselves of, what exactly is it, and what are the real requirements, and what does that service need to deliver. And then we're trying to make sure that we design efficient, cost-effective services, and again, not just the services, but the processes, the policies, everything that's needed. In service strategy, we made some decisions that we are going to use third-party suppliers for some of this. So in service design, we want to identify who those suppliers are so that we can start to bring them on board, and they can help us with things, and they can actually help us start to create some of these plans for security and availability, capacity, and continuity. Again, things that you might not think of as part of design, but need to be thought of from the very beginning to ensure that you design your services around these things. And then the processes that are in service transition. Again, some of these are ones that you may be familiar with. Others you're looking at and going, I'm not even sure, again, what that really is. So look at the activities we're doing here. We're, in this stage of the life cycle, really trying to implement our services and do that per the requirements document that we put together and per the designs and everything that we developed and created and captured back in the design stage. And we want to now build and test and deploy these services and start to roll them out into the environments and eventually, of course, into production. And all the time that we're doing that, we've got existing services that we've got to manage, because there are changes that are being made to those to accommodate things the business needs. So all of that's going on at the same time, and we're doing all of this to really manage risk to the business, because as we introduce new services or we change existing services, we all know that every time you do a change, you create the opportunity to break something else. And so we need to manage that and make sure that we're properly limiting the amount of risk that we put the business to by trying to respond to the changes that they need us to do. We're going to start to acquire an awful lot of knowledge here about our services and our components and our assets, and we want to start to build that knowledge so that we'll be able to provide it later when it's needed and not have to reinvent the wheel. And of course, what we're really trying to do in service transition is make sure that the value that we identified back in strategy and that we designed our services to deliver is in fact really capable of being delivered by the services that we're building and testing and starting to deploy into the environments. And then the processes in service operation are processes that most of you are probably a lot more familiar with. Incident management, request fulfillment, event and problem management, access management. And then the functions that we talked about. You usually have some kind of a service desk or a help desk, and you've got your application, your technology support teams and groups, and you've got facilities management. And here I'm talking about your data center facilities themselves, your data centers, your backup facilities, all of those kinds of things. So you have all of that in service operation. And again, the functions here that we're really trying to do, well, we're trying to deliver services to our users. And we're trying to do that within the prescribed and agreed to service levels. And we're always looking at ways to reduce cost and increase quality. And then, of course, we're going to have outages, so we want to minimize the impact of those outages when they occur by having the capability to do some workarounds and some other things to keep the business up and going while we really fix whatever it is that broke. We need to build and leverage our application and technology skills and make sure our people have the right amount of training and the right tools to really do what they need to do. And then, of course, these processes are the ones that most often touch your customers and your users. So we're trying to build and maintain user satisfaction by the way that we are able to deliver these services in a very professional manner and the way we communicate with our customers. And, of course, what we're really trying to do here still is to make sure that the services that we provide really do enable the business to achieve the outcomes that they need to achieve to be successful. And then the last stage of the life cycle is the continual service improvement stage. And there's only one process here, the 7-step improvement process, but it's a very critical process because this is the activity that we're doing here is we're gradually trying to become more effective, more efficient, and make sure that we adapt to changing business needs because the business is always changing. They're moving forward, they're taking on new businesses, they themselves are providing new services. We've got to create services that support those and allow them to do all of that. So now that you see it from this perspective and you're not just looking at a bunch of processes and you see the whole picture of what's occurring during each stage of the life cycle, let me ask you a question. Are you not already doing most of these things? Have you not already answered the questions and strategy and done the activities that are shown here? And maybe you haven't actually implemented a formal service catalog as shown in service design, but somewhere you've got a list of services that you're delivering and you've designed those services, you've created policies, you've identified and you're managing some suppliers probably, you've done some level of planning for security, availability, capacity, and maybe you don't call it a service design package, but I'm willing to bet that as you rolled out your services, you had some form of a vehicle for communicating requirements, of capturing what you designed, what your test plans are, what your test results are, whether that's a folder somewhere or maybe even done on paper. Of course, if you have services, you must have built and tested these. You've done some level of risk management and you've started to collect knowledge about those services and you're changing things. You're making changes on a daily basis and those things are happening. And then finally, if you're delivering services, well, you're managing incidents. You've got outages and you're dealing with those and you're trying to minimize the impact on business when those occur and you're trying to build and maintain that user satisfaction. And just the fact that you're here tells me that you're attempting to become more efficient and more effective to make sure that you can keep up with what the business needs. So now that you see all the activity here, let me ask you the question again. Is your organization not already doing most of the activities shown here? And if you are, then you're doing service management. And I'm betting that you're doing most of these and you are doing service management. So back to my initial statement, you don't implement the ITIL service lifecycle. You adopt and you adapt best practices from the service lifecycle that will help you do the things that you're doing today. You look at the things you're currently doing. You focus on what you might not be doing as well as you need to. What does your fixer-upper look like? Compare it to the best practices and the concepts already shown in ITIL, and then identify what you need to adopt and adapt or what you need to fix the most, what you can afford to fix, both from a time and money standpoint, and then really start to make things better. Now, when you're doing this, it might be really useful to look at the inputs and outputs from all of the processes and all the stages, because it may well be that a particular process or an area you're struggling with isn't really the area where the real problem or the root cause exists. It may well be that the output from another process is actually where the breakdown exists. There's a saying we have in Texas, if the water tastes bad, the dead cow is probably upstream. And that's probably not a Texas saying. I think I made that up. But it does prove the point here. If you're having trouble achieving service targets and operations, the problem may not be the incident management process, so the operations team itself, but it might be in the way that service was designed, in the way that it was tested during transition, in the way that the process and methods that you're using to support that service were put together. So it's important to understand what the inputs and the outputs of each stage of the life cycle and each one of the processes are, and how they could impact other processes within the life cycle, because everything impacts something else. And this really might help you in determining exactly where you need to look for best practices, what stage you need to look at, what process you need to look at to find the practices and the concepts that you need to adopt and adapt for your fixer-upper. Now, one of the key concepts of the ITIL service lifecycle is the Deming Model, Plan, Do, Check, Act. And this really speaks to the approach of adopt and adapt. Under this approach, you establish a baseline of where you are now, and then you plan what you need to do to improve, and then you do it. And then you check the results to see if you achieve the goal that you had for that. And then based on your findings, you take some actions to move closer to the outcome you need. And then you baseline again, and you repeat that cycle. And you do this in short, repeating cycles so that you can maintain momentum, and over time, raise the maturity level of your services and your processes, and increase your service management capabilities. I mean, after all, you didn't get in the situation you are overnight, and you're not going to improve it overnight. It needs to be a consistent, steady approach to achieve the outcomes that you and the business both need. Now, the CSI approach is something, the continual service approach, is something that's talked about within the continual service improvement stage of ITIL, but you know, it really belongs in every book of ITIL because it really can be applied anywhere along the way and should be applied anywhere along the way. And what we're doing here is we're trying to, first off, understand what is the vision. And to do that, I'm going to go look at the business vision, the mission, the goals and objectives that the business has. And then from that, I'm going to create a strategy or a business vision, a mission, goals and objectives of what we as an IT organization need to do to help them achieve that vision. How do we help them achieve their strategy? What's our strategy for helping them achieve their strategy, if you will? And one of the things I'm going to do as part of this is I'm going to identify what are the critical success factors. What do we have to do? What has to happen to succeed? For us to be successful in our vision, our mission, our goals and objectives, and to allow the business to be successful with what they're doing and what their goals and objectives are. And then once I've established that, now I can look at where am I now against that? How well am I doing in achieving those critical success factors? And I can put together a baseline assessment of where I am today, what needs to be done, what do I need to start doing better than what I'm doing right now. And then I want to look at where do we want to be? You know, where do we want to be 30 days from now? Where do we want to be 60 days from now? Where do we want to be 90 days from now? And for that, I want to identify what are some measurable targets. And those measurable targets are what we call key performance indicators. And they're measurements that allow us to show progress towards the achievement of that critical success factor. What are we doing to show us that we're trending in the right direction, that we're moving in the right direction with what we need to do? And then once we know what those key performance indicators are, we can start to talk about, well, how do we improve these? How do we get there? How do we get these moving in the right direction? And that's where we're going to look to create service and process improvement plans that tell us what we do need to do to improve and how we're actually going to do that. And, you know, again, our key performance indicators should tell us how quickly we think we need to do that. And then the next part of the approach is just to keep looking at, did we get there? And to do that, we're going to continue to go look at our measurements, and we're going to collect measurements and metrics and see how our key performance indicators are really showing us the right trends and everything in the right direction. And of course, we got to keep all this momentum going. And the way that we do that is this whole cycle of plan, do, check, act, where we're doing this in short iterations. We're constantly going back and looking at what's the vision, where are we now, where do we want to be, how do we get there, did we get there, and then repeating this and coming back and hitting it again. Those critical success factors are going to change as the business vision changes, as their mission and their goals and objectives change. And so we need to constantly be looking at those. And then every time the critical success factors change, of course, we're going to change our key performance indicators of what we need to be measuring and what we need to do to get those measurements moving in the right direction. So that's how this continual service improvement approach fits into this and will help you with improving your capabilities and moving forward. Now, what I'm going to share with you now is a look at one way to improve your service management capability and move up the level of maturity. And, you know, when most organizations start out, and some of these may be processes that you already have in place, but when most organizations start out, you know, these are the processes they typically focus on. You know, you're doing incident management, you're doing some sort of request fulfillment, you've got problem management. It may be just reactive at this point to where you're really only doing it because you had an incident and you've got to now figure out the root cause, and you may not even at the beginning be understanding that that's problem management that you're doing and not incident management, but that's okay. We're going to look at how we apply best practices to improve that. You're making changes, so you're doing some kind of change management, and you probably have some sort of list out there, even if it's just spreadsheets in everybody's drawer that show what assets you have and what assets are part of the organization that you're trying to manage. And there's some collective knowledge out there that you have within your group. So this is where you're going to go look at those best practices in ITIL and look at how you can improve these specific processes based on where you're having pain or where things are not working right today or where you see that need for improvement. And I'm trying to get from the point where I can move from being reactive to now look at, what processes do I need to put in place now to become a little bit more proactive and move my level of maturity up a notch. So when I start to look at those processes, I look at things like transition planning and support, which is the process that makes sure that everything that I'm doing during transition in terms of building and testing and moving things forward properly is getting done, and there's some management around that, and it's not just chaos. And then I'm going to take my asset management that I created in the beginning with when I was looking at those processes, and now I'm going to start to look at maybe moving that into my ITSM tool if it wasn't there before, and along with that, starting to add in some relationship information. So I'm now upgrading to service asset and configuration management, where I start to know something about these assets, and I know when I have a change how the upstream and downstream assets are going to possibly be affected by this. I can look at release and deployment here, which speaks to how I'm going to actually move things between the test environments and the user test environments and development environments and eventually into production, and how I'm going to manage those releases and make sure that I deploy those successfully. Now, I can tell you that those last two, service asset and release deployment, if you don't already have a fairly mature change management process in place, you're probably not going to be successful, because those really rely on having that process in place. And then service level management. Back in the reactive mode when we were doing incident and change requests, we're starting to gather a lot of metrics about how long it takes us to respond to an incident, how long it takes us to resolve an incident, how long does it take us to fulfill a request. We can now use that information to go out and talk with our customer and our users about what level of service do they really need and what do they really require. And we can negotiate with them to say, okay, well, based on historically what we've been able to do, in order for us to deliver that level of service, we would have to get some funding to do this, or we would have to make some improvements here, and that's what this would cost, and that's what it would cost to move up to this next level. Some very valuable information here, but we need to start looking now at service level management to become more proactive. And then the same thing with problem management. We said back in the reactive stage, we're really just doing reactive problem management where we're doing it because we had an incident. Proactive problem management is all about using the information that we collected in incident management to now look at some trending and try to start to identify trends that are leading up to problems before those problems actually occur, and trying to solve those before the customer is really affected by them, or get a problem opened and get people working on it before people really get affected by it in a negative way perhaps. And then the same with event management. We're now looking to monitor our infrastructure that's used for the applications and services, and start to recognize the events that we're seeing there and how those could eventually cause an incident if they're not dealt with, and hopefully deal with them through some level of automation to make it easier and faster to deal with these events. And again, becoming more proactive, so hopefully we can see what's happening in the environment before it impacts the customer, and we react to it again, hopefully through some automation, but if not, at least react to it and get ahead of the customer calling us and telling us they got a problem. When I start to look at processes that'll get me more customer focused, I'm looking at processes like capacity and availability management, making sure that I'm planning for where the customer's going and what they're going to need in the future. And then I've got that in place before they reach that need or they reach that critical time to when some things are going to change. To do that, I've got to have effective business relationship management in place. So somebody has that responsibility to be working with the customer and the business to really understand their patterns of business activity and where they're going with things and what they're expecting to do so that I can take this up to the next level. If I haven't already created some form of a service catalog, this is the point where I really want to get serious about service catalog management and making sure that my services are well defined and I've got somewhere where users can go find out about those services and look at what service level is being offered to them and what they can expect and what their responsibilities are and what the IT organization's responsibilities are for that particular service, and then order those services. And don't confuse service catalog with service portal. They're not the same thing. Supplier management. We've been possibly using some suppliers here, but to really move us to the level of maturity that we're customer focused, we have to consider that we're often spending that customer's money with these suppliers. So we want to make sure that we're spending it well, we're getting the most out of our suppliers, we're getting everything we need from them, and we're getting true value from that contract we have with that supplier. And that kind of leads us into financial and service costing, where as part of being customer focused, we want to start to understand what's it costing us to deliver these services to our customers and to our users. How much does it cost us for incident management? How much will it cost? What's the cost per incident? What's the cost per request? You know, all of those kinds of things. What's the cost per change? That's going to allow us to now start to look at becoming more business focused. And we can now start to look at, okay, now that we know what a service costs, maybe we develop some chargeback mechanisms to where we charge for these services, and through that, help us control demand a little bit. And we also want, as part of being more business focused, start to look at processes like service continuity to make sure that we have a continuity plan that's very much aligned with the business and their business continuity plan. So in the event they do have to invoke some sort of a business continuity plan or a fallback, we're right there with them, and we've got the IT to support that. And then, you know, trying to move up the ladder as far as we can go, we get the value focused. And this is where we want to make sure that our service portfolio is really kind of leading the business, and we're out there ahead of them or with them with the services that we can offer and how those can impact the business, and making sure that they're in our pipeline and we're getting out ahead of it and getting that out there for the business to use, and we're taking advantage of emerging technologies and all of those sorts of things. And we're really, at this point, looking at our service strategy processes and making sure that our strategy is tightly aligned with the business strategy. So again, these are just some thoughts on, you know, what the timing should be to look at some of these processes. It's one approach. It's not the only approach here again, but it just gives you an idea of, you know, what you can be looking at. Keep in mind that you may spend a lot of time in each one of these levels of maturity, spinning some cycles to get up to where you need to be with each one of the processes that are here. And even when you get past that stage, you're probably going to go back to these processes and look for ways to continually improve them to help you move up the level of maturity. Now, one of the better things to come out of ITIL in the last few years has been a course called ITIL Practitioner. And it really deals with, you know, how do you take everything that you learned in Foundations and really start to apply it into your environment and really get it kind of working for you. And within that, they have 9 guiding principles that they talk about. And they really apply well to what we're talking about here as we're talking about looking at adopting and adapting the service lifecycle. You know, first, keep it simple. When you're designing or improving your processes and your services, use the minimum number of steps that are really needed to get the results or the outcome you need. And again, this is where adopt and adapt really comes into play. You know, do what you need to do now and then improve on that to get to the next step later. But, you know, just because it's a step in a best practice approach doesn't mean that it's right for your organization at the level of process maturity that you're currently at. You know, if it doesn't produce a valuable outcome right now, then ask yourself why you're doing that step. And then collaborate. The more people that are actively involved in your improvement efforts, the more the amount of information increases and the better able you're going to be to make the right decisions. And not to mention the benefit of getting buy-in from those people, which is a significant part of organizational change, which we'll talk about in a couple more moments here. Now, along with this comes transparency. People need to know what's happening, why it's happening, what the expected outcomes or results are going to be, and what the success or failure of that effort was. And if you do fail, you want to make sure, of course, that you turn that failure into a learning experience of what do we need to do better next time. And when we go to our next cycle of Plan, Do, Check, Act, how do we benefit from what didn't work right this time? And then observe directly. And this is a key concept that's shared by a lot of other frameworks like Lean, Six Sigma. And it really talks about the fact that the closer you can get to the work being done, the more likely you are to identify information that's going to help you make better decisions. You can't design these processes in a glass house, in the executive boardroom. You need to get down where the people are actually doing the work and work with them and understand what they're facing on a daily basis and what their problems are and how these things impact them. And all that's best done by observing directly. And then progress iteratively. And this goes back to the concept of Plan, Do, Check, Act that we've been talking about and the entire continual service improvement approach. You know, keep your improvement efforts organized into short cycles with specific targets that are SMART. And hopefully we all know what SMART is, that it's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely targets. And then focus on value. I often hear IT organizations say, we have to create value. And I argue that that's not the role of IT. IT should enable the business to create value. Everything that we do as a service provider should be targeted at enabling the business to achieve the outcomes they need to achieve to make the business successful. And then design for experience. And here we're talking about the customer experience. Design your services and your processes around what the customer will experience when they're using that service or interacting with that process. What are their preferences? How do they want to request and use the services? What are their expectations when there's a service incident, when they go to the portal to order a service? And what kind of communications or information do they need? And then next, start where you are. You know, as we've been talking about throughout this presentation, you most likely have processes and services in place. So identify what's working and build off of that. Don't just reinvent the wheel. And if what you have is completely unusable, still don't just start from scratch. Look at best practices and how you can adopt and adapt those to meet your needs. And then finally, you know, no process or service exists in a vacuum. Every process in the life cycle has inputs and outputs to other processes, and every service relies on other services. So you always have to consider the bigger picture and make sure that with whatever you're doing, you're not putting something else at risk or harming something other process or getting in the way of some other process. Now, I can't understate the need for organizational change management as any part of an effort like this. You know, improving your organizational capabilities for service management means changing the way the organization works, the services they use, the way they use them, the way they deliver and support them. And a lot of continual service improvement efforts, or adopt and adapt, or even if you want to call this implement ITIL, efforts fail because they fail to achieve that result that they wanted because they fail to address the people side of changes. People don't like to change. The benefits must be explained to everyone to get their support, and then ensure that they break out of their old working habits and they embrace the new way of doing business. And this involves effective organizational change management. And that means creating a vision of what the organization will look like after the change. It means strong and effective sponsorship to lead the organization through that change. You've got to have well-defined roles and responsibilities, not just for what people are going to do during the change to make it happen, but to what's going to be done after the change is finished, and we're doing this as part of our daily business. And then stakeholder management needs to be in place so that we ensure that the impact of the change for each stakeholder group is clearly understood and it's effectively communicated using a well-planned communication strategy and plan. And it means empowering people to make the change by giving them the responsibility and the authority to do that, along with the skills and the experience and the tools, the management architectures, all the other things they need to have to be successful. And it also means planning ahead for any resistance to the change so that when it happens, and it's going to happen, it can be dealt with immediately and effectively. And then most important, celebrating the success that you're achieving through continual service improvement, and doing it in a way that recognizes past efforts as well as the improvements achieved. A lot of times the people that you're asking to change the way they work were responsible for inventing the way they work. And so you need to recognize that that was great for its time, but that help them clearly understand why those times have changed and why we have to do something different now and why they've got to get on board with that. So let's go back to our initial questions, why you are here. You know, hopefully by now you understand what the ITIL service lifecycle really is and where to find information about that. And you understand, hopefully, how it can help your organization be more successful simply by adopting and adapting best practices that have helped other organizations be successful and are proven in that they have the capability to do that. You know, how do you implement this beast? Well, you don't. Setting up a project to implement 26 processes is a fool's mission. Instead, you need to look at what we can adopt and adapt from best practices for specific areas where we need help. And granted, over time, if you're lucky, you might implement all 26 processes, and that's great. But I can tell you that I've been doing this for, as Rich said, 30 years, and I don't think I've ever seen an organization really do all 26 processes the way that they're outlined in ITIL. You know, how can you make your boss think you know more about this stuff? Well, hopefully I've helped give you some information. This is going to let you do that. But more importantly, hopefully you understand that this service lifecycle is backed up by the ITIL library. And you can go there to get more information, and you can get education on the ITIL service lifecycle, about ITIL. And that's really going to help you be able to explain this better to your organization and move everything forward. And like I said, I only promised 4 out of 5. So I don't think I've really helped you with this one too much. But hopefully by explaining some of these things to you, It's going to allow you to make your life a little less challenging, and then you can work on finding the true meaning of life. Now, I do want to just give you some parting thoughts. I know we're running close on time here, but I know you've all heard the parable or the fable about the 5 blind men finding an elephant and trying to describe the elephant based on where they're touching the elephant, where they're experiencing, and what they're feeling and seeing from their perspective. And if you look at a lot of what's going on in the industry today with Agile and DevOps and Lean and a lot of the emerging technologies that are out there, that's kind of what I see here. I mean, all of those are really describing service management, and they're all describing it from their perspective that they're coming from, and they're all valid perspectives based on their history and their experience and what they're trying to accomplish. But they're all describing the same thing. They're all describing service management, and they're all describing, in some cases, or in different ways, but they're still describing the processes that are part of the service management lifecycle. And most of these other technologies and frameworks, aren't about process. They're about how to implement process, but not about the processes themselves. So, keep in mind that this doesn't work in a vacuum. It's back to that same thing about being holistic. All of this has got to work together, and you've got to consider all of those other frameworks and methodologies along with ITIL if, in fact, you're going to be successful. And with that, Rich, I'll turn it back over to you.
Chuck, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to present this to us. This is the first time I've seen this presentation, folks. It's the first time we've ever had Chuck do it, and I think it was very insightful. So for those of you, and a lot of you have asked, that are looking for a link to this presentation, it'll take us a couple days to get it ready and up there, but go ahead and email me at rich.longo@flycastpartners.com. That's rich.longo@flycastpartners.com, and let me know. Or pick up the phone, call us, 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. And with that being said, I'm going to wish everybody a great weekend. Thank you for joining.
Thank you all.